I feel like growing up, I grew more close to my mom and my sister, and I think that kind of affected how I developed growing up. I was more effeminate. It kind of made me a target for bullying.
In your life, you had a sister, and obviously you have a mom, but it could be an older cousin, it could be a neighbor, friend, or whatever, where we as boys just kind of latch onto and tend to over-identify.
In some ways, I feel like even through my middle school or high school years, I tried to cope with the certain verbal abuse by just becoming an abuser.
When another person, when an opposite sex individual is actually becoming more important to us than God, guess what? That's an idol in our life.
I think about that verse that talks about my grace is sufficient for you, my power is made perfect in weakness, and Paul's like, please, Lord, take out this thorn. Like, I don't want this anymore. And he's like pleading. I feel like that thorn for me was same-sex attraction.
Not only do we binge on these things when we are hurting or lonely or, fill in the gaps of what's wrong, but also when something good happens, it's like, okay, what do I do? Well, so many times we turn to our brokenness even to celebrate.
I don't want this to be the main story of my life. Like, I think there's so much more. The struggles or the problems, it's like, that's just one small thing in his story that he has for me, like my life. And I can only imagine,
Welcome to the Love and Truth Network podcast, your guide for hope and healing in a hurting world searching for truth. Here we explore God's extraordinary design for biblical sexuality, identity, and authentic community. You'll be impacted by incredible stories of transformation, practical wisdom from pastors and counselors, and the power of God's grace that changes lives.
Hey everybody, thank you for joining us for another episode of the Love and Truth Network podcast. We're super excited that you're here with us today. And also, you probably hear a lot of noise going on around us. We actually are here at the American Association of Christian Counselors Conference. And so we have a booth set up, as you can kind of see in our background, and lots of people are milling around, but we are excited to be with you from this location. And I get to grab people that I've known for a while and people that I've known in some cases for many years and just say, hey, we'd love to hear your story. I'd love to kind of dialogue with you about topics that we often talk about on our podcast. And so our very first person is someone I've known for about a year or so. It's Michael, and he's with us today to share some of his story and for us to kind of engage in just some dialogue about topics that matter to us, and I know topics that matter to you as well. So thank you for joining us. Michael, thank you for joining us as well.
Absolutely. Thanks, Gary. No, I really appreciate being here. I'll just go ahead and share my story, if that's fine with you. But basically, I grew up in a Christian home. I was the youngest of three. I have an older sister, an older brother. I have a very loving parents. I feel like growing up, I grew more close to my mom and my sister. And I think that kind of affected how I developed growing up. I was more effeminate. I had a lot of girlfriends, but never actually a girlfriend. And eventually that just created a lot of, it kind of made me a target for bullying growing up. And so in that created a lot of, just a lot of fear, a lot of shame. And I just kind of was really wrestling in that. I knew about God, but I didn't really have a relationship with Christ, even though maybe at a young age I thought I did. But I'd gone to several different camps growing up and gave my life to the Lord. But it wasn't until my freshman year of college where I finally took that step more seriously and gave my heart to Christ. But I was just really wrestling with my identity. I've struggled with same-sex attraction for most of my life, and I think that just has brought a lot of shame just in my identity as a man, just wondering how do you reconcile this, but also wanting to be a Christian. And I think in my heart, I've always wanted to have a wife, but just part of my experience was just these attractions felt like it was too much, or I didn't know what a girl would think of me or how she would accept me. And so, but that summer I went to Honduras after I was about 18. And I went with a group of other college students that I'd known, and we were building houses in a certain city. I can't disclose, in Honduras, but it was a great summer. Super hot. We were literally carrying logs down a mountain to build like these houses and huts for the villages. It was really awesome experience. And but in the midst of all of those good things, I was just still wrestling with my identity. And we would have these prayer meetings at night. And I remember one of my friends just asking me, basically coming up to me, was saying, Michael, I sense like there's a lot of darkness in you, which is a pretty bold statement just for anyone. But because this was a trusted friend, I also knew that, like, they're right. And so I just came clean. I told them what was going on. I just told them how I felt like the enemy made me believe this lie for so long, that I was gay, and that I wanted just so much more for my life. And I just remember crying out to God and giving my heart back to Him. And I just kind of made these declarations, like, I believe I can be a good father. Like, I will be a good husband, even though I don't see it, even though in the midst of just my current circumstance. And so I just felt like His love just pouring over me that night. And I've just honestly haven't felt the same ever since then, in the best way. I felt like after I went back to college, I had more of a heart for my other students, especially those like who felt like more of the outcasts, like I had been. I kind of felt like the misfit, or like someone that didn't quite fit the stereotypical Christian guy, that every Christian man and woman, we all struggle with different things. It felt like mine was just more taboo to talk about. And so I felt like God has brought different people in my life where I could share my struggles. I can be more open. And in different ways, I've been able to just be a friend to someone else as well. And so, with that, I'm really thankful. My journey is still unfolding.
Yeah, as is true for all of us.
Mm-hmm. I'm still like a youngling in the faith. But I love Jesus, and I love my family and friends. And I know they love me too.
And how old are you now, Michael?
I am 27.
27, okay.
Yes.
And how long have you been out of school?
Oh gosh, let's see. I graduated 2020. So,
okay. 5 years ago.
Yes, 5 years.
Yep. And let's back up a little bit more in your story. And you talked about being the youngest, and the youngest of three, and you have an older brother and an older sister. We were talking earlier about how your brother was literally a bodybuilder, and how you had said that you didn't even really wrestle with kind of comparing yourself to him, because you didn't really rephrase this in a way that is actually true.
I didn't look up to him. Yeah,
and like his personality, or just the kind of way he was pretty rough and challenging. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. And so, for people listening or viewing this, I just want them to understand how it makes so much sense. Your story sounds a lot like my own story, but it makes so much sense how, we don't necessarily connect well early on with our fathers as boys. We don't oftentimes connect well with even older siblings, but as same-sex siblings. But yet there's in your life, you had a sister, and obviously you have a mom, but it could be an older cousin, it could be a neighbor, friend, or whatever, where we as boys just kind of latch onto and tend to over-identify. I often explain that about my story, is that I disconnected from boys and men around me because I felt unsafe. I was often bullied. I was often the brunt of jokes. I was the brunt of all kinds of labels and language. You experienced some of that too. And I'd love you to speak to that in a minute. But the reality also is I over-identified with my sister, my mother, girls at school, girls at church. And it sounds like you had a lot of those same experiences of that, feeling like I'm safe in the world of girls and I just kind of marinate there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, I can resonate with everything you said. I think just what you mentioned about being the blunt of all jokes or something, like I think just all different kinds of names, labels that just really hurt. And in some ways, I feel like even through my my middle school or high school years, I tried to cope with the certain verbal abuse by just becoming an abuser, like more so like a bully, and just bullying other people as a way to somehow compensate for the insecurity I felt in my heart.
Sarcasm or cutting other people down.
Yeah, and honestly, just name calling other people. For my making my other friends laugh or something, things like that. And it only goes so far, but it still didn't really it didn't really satisfy. It just didn't really make me content at all. But yeah, so that was those years. And what was the other question you had asked?
Well, I was just asking. I was just kind of wanting people to understand a little bit about how you as a boy, I as a boy, so many others I've talked to have had that experience. I mean, let's just be real. Lots of boys don't have great connections with their fathers. I mean, that's just true. And lots of girls don't either. So it's not just that there's a problem of having a poor connection with our same-sex parent, mother or father. That's often the case, and more often the case than not, unfortunately. But it's also the over-identification with the feminine for boys, where a lot of guys that don't have good relationships with their fathers tend to still hang out with boys. They are in kind of more that rough and tumble experience of knowing themselves in the context of peers. I don't think you and I got a lot of that with our own gender, our own sex. It was with girls throughout all of our developmental years. Is that a fair way of summarizing a little bit of your story?
I would say so.
Yeah. And so in light of that, the idea of kind of marinating in the world of the feminine through our developmental years, it's really no wonder by the time we hit puberty, by the time we move beyond that into our teenage years, we kind of relationally and emotionally know all about girls. Right? What we don't know about is our own sex. We haven't really been in relationships that have been healthy with other boys, and so that's part of what feeds that craving, that legitimate need for connecting and knowing ourselves through the relationship with other guys. And when that's absent and is completely missing in most cases, it can often lead to this sexualized kind of attachment to our own gender, in a sense, developing same-sex attraction. When were you first introduced to either pornography or some kind of sexual thing?
Yeah, I was 11 years old. It was an accident, honestly. I just was watching TV one day, just flipping channels, and came across just a pornographic video it was actually of a woman, and I just was, I don't know, just confused about the whole thing, and but I think I was just more curious later on, and once I had access to my own phone, I just would Google or YouTube different things, just all kinds of explicit content.
And how old were you about the first time that you saw?
The first time I was about 11.
Yeah, okay. So just kind of coming into puberty, basically, maybe had just arrived there. And so the impact, I mean, I remember when I was 5 or 6 and first saw pornographic images, and those are still very clear, in my own mind, and because they were blazoned. Those first experiences are very formative and very powerful experiences, and so you experienced this at around just coming into puberty, 11 or so, and then later, when you did get a phone, you had the freedom to kind of engage there. The thing about pornography and sexual sin is it so mimics authentic intimacy. You've heard me say that on previous podcasts, right? But yeah, I mean, what would you say about that for yourself?
Well, I mean, in a way, it's like trying to make that fantasy come to life in some way, or like trying to fill the void. In some ways, I felt like I could never be with the girl, so like porn was kind of like that outlet to make that come true in some way. But my addiction was more so with homosexual porn, or just gay porn, and that I think it was more so with body image. I didn't like my body, but like a man's body that was like perfect or something was just something to be, I don't know, admired, but in a twisted way. So I feel like the enemy tried to use that to just, I don't know, distort my whole view of men and women. And so, yeah, for sure.
So what we really need, we teach a lot about this idea. it's very common for boys, I think for some girls as well, to have that. Obviously, lots of girls deal with body image issues, and body image issues alone doesn't open a door to or lead to same-sex attraction. But when you couple that with the lack of connection, again, with dad, lack of connection with your brother, over-identification with mom, your sister, my mom and sister as well, and you have all of that kind of going on at the same time, and then you have these other things that are also introduced. That you have the labeling, you have the name calling, you have the bullying going on, and people telling you who you are, right? And not in a kind way at all. Just all this nasty kind of tearing down sarcasm and mocking kind of stuff. It does wear on our soul. I mean, there's no doubt about that. It has an impact on us. I think anybody listening to this who's being honest with themselves at all understands that that's totally true. But there's many things that can feed into and kind of move us toward, open up the doorway toward same-sex attraction, and especially when something becomes sexualized early, when all this emptiness, when all this emotional angst, when all of this pain becomes sexualized, and that feels like, oh wow, like this meets a need, this fills in the gap. Well, it does for a moment, but then it also takes more than it ever gives to us.
Yeah, it definitely stole my joy and just a lack of, just a sense of peace, I think, which has taken years to recover from. And even just in years of being sober, more so a year actually, if I'm honest. But I think it's something that your brain really has to rewire. But yeah, for sure.
You mentioned other addictions outside of this issue, and I don't know to what degree you want to get into any of that, but what were some of the other things that kind of compounded your wrestling or struggling?
Yeah, well, masturbation, that was a big one. That one was more like a drug for me, like, if anything, and it was kind of like that pseudo intimacy that I was trying to find. That I just got hooked on that, and it's I think that's been something that I'm honestly still trying to heal from in some ways, and it's something that brings some shame still every now and then, but I'm trying to give that to God in dealing with. So,
well, and the reality of this, and this is one of the reasons I like to and want to do podcasts with people who aren't like, oh, this happened to me 20 years ago, and this is all done and kind of packed away, and it's all finished, and now I'm on to something else. Those are great stories, and I'm glad for people to share them. But I also want people to know that, look, I'm in process. We're all in process of one kind or another, and also, like, sexual sin usually kind of falls away in layers. And for me, it was I was no longer sleeping with guys. For me, it was I was no longer compulsively drawn into that kind of stuff. And then later, pornography kind of fell away, and then later, masturbation. That was the hardest thing to really overcome, because it's such an ever present opportunity, basically, and often a temptation. But so the fact that God is still at work in your life, and you're still giving him more and more of yourself, and giving him more and more of your obedience, I think is part of the discipleship journey and process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think the ironic thing is that it's sometimes when I feel like I've healed in one area, it seems like there's another problem that comes up. And I'm not trying to say this is some like yin yang thing of the balance of things. It's just, I don't know, you can call it whatever you want, like a spiritual attack or just random circumstance. But that's been my experience so far, like where I sometimes get in this really good place in my life, and then there's the temptation, or like there's a new issue that I feel like I have to solve now, and stuff like that. And so, well, it does feel ironic.
Relationships or things. What's like that?
Like a codependent relationship.
Yeah. Well, and I do want to speak to that in a minute as well. But what you're talking about to me highlights the reality that so many people think that we just cope with negative feelings with alcohol or drugs or sexual sin or masturbation or whatever. And that's true oftentimes. But what I've also found to be true, and this was a little bit more of a revelation, like I was kind of surprised when I realized, and this is oftentimes where people are that are dealing with issues of abusing food, being overweight or having some kind of brokenness around, whether it's anorexia or bulimia or something going on, a food or eating disorder of some kind, is that not only do we binge on these things when we are hurting or lonely or, fill in the gaps of what's wrong, but also when celebration, when something good happens, it's like, okay, what do I do? Well, so many times we turn to our brokenness even to celebrate, which is also kind of confusing. I don't think most of us are kind of expecting that. But so when our emotions are heightened, either negatively or even positively, even positive emotions can lead us back to the thing that we use over and over again to comfort, soothe, or celebrate. And I feel like that's part of what you were even kind of alluding to there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. Well, and so I'd love to talk with you more about, I think you just mentioned, it's a little bit noisy in here with all the people around us and all that, but I think you had mentioned a little bit about emotional dependent relationships, right? And so that was a big thing for me and I think that's kind of where a lot of the sexual brokenness for me just kind of exploded and went into high gear. It began with all of this emotional dependency. It began with this feeling of I'm not really a man. I mean, I know that I am in a sense, but I feel so broken. I feel like I'm just a husk of a man. I don't feel like I have anything really on the inside that kind of makes me a man. I don't know how to stand up or kind of rise up to be courageous in much of anything or to kind of know who I am as a man. There were just all these questions, all of this sense of just being having no form really around my masculinity. And so it was very easy. As I look back now, I see over and over again where I was leaning into and pursuing, usually it was with one guy, not multiple guys, but it was with one guy kind of at a time. I would tend to make an idol out of him. I would see things about him that, whether it was the way he carried himself or the way that, his musculature or whatever, there were things about him that I felt I was completely lacking and felt like I just didn't have all that it took to be a man. And if somehow this guy wanted to be around me, if he wanted to be friends to start with, if he wanted to start with in my own mind, but that oftentimes led into other things. But emotional dependency was a very, very strong idol in my life. I think you've experienced some of that as well.
Mm-hmm. I did, yeah. I think it originally started my freshman year. Thank you for sharing that, by the way. My freshman roommate I had imagined him being my best friend, and I think I just kind of came to terms that I may have had too high of an expectation, and I think just unrealistic standards. In a way, I didn't want him to have other friends. I was jealous when he was around just other guys, and sometimes I was confused about that, and I was like, why am I feeling this way? Like, why can't I just be distant, or why do I feel like I have to be attached or latched on? And I think it was partially because of that emotional dependency. I had to open up a lot to that person, and I gave a lot of trust to them, and it's not necessarily that they betrayed my trust. I think I had such an unrealistic view that when just as that year panned out and just we had different interests, or like we hung around different people, I guess I felt like I was doing something wrong, or I could have been doing something better. And so I just kind of judged myself and was like, oh, I must not be good enough, or like I'm not good enough of a friend, which is a total lie. Looking at it now, it's crazy, like all these years. But yeah, and that chapter closed. I've met several other friends since then, which I'm very thankful for. But along the way, unfortunately, there were some other friends that I found were just a little unhealthy, a little toxic, where I think I may have idolized them, if I can use that word, but just like, and trying to, I don't even know if I can even say like I made them like God or something, but it was just unrealistic expectations and standards and things like that. And just had to learn from those experiences.
Yeah. Well, also, we do a lot of ministry, as you know, not just in the LGBT space. Frankly, we do less ministry kind of in LGBT space than we do with general heterosexual brokenness in the church. There's lots and lots of that around in the church. And what we find is oftentimes people don't even recognize when they are emotionally dependent on the opposite sex, when they become way too dependent, that this person, like you said, you talked about, kind of being an idol for you, but when another person, when an opposite sex individual is actually becoming more important to us than God, guess what? That's an idol in our life. Maybe we're going to church, maybe we're even reading our Bibles, but when that other person is what our world revolves around, and oftentimes I think we do see our relationship with God begin to slip and falter because this person does take on a role that is really crowding God out and replacing the importance of God. And I see this happening in the church all the time. So this isn't just in the same-sex attraction space or the LGBT space.
Yeah.
I think that many of us in the church... What's that?
Glad I'm not alone.
No, yeah, you certainly are not alone, not by a long shot. And even going into marriage, I think that many times Christians embrace marriage, and we kind of see the results of, I think, going into marriage with wrong assumptions based on how high the divorce rate is in the church. The divorce rate is way better in the church than it is in the world generally, but it's still incredibly too high in the church as well. And so part of the reason for that is I think the foundation of Christian marriage is so often about what you're going to do for me, that I need you to complete me, that I need you to fill in all these emotional needs in my heart. And for us, dealing with same-sex attraction, like we understand how off that is toward another guy. At least we do now looking back in hindsight. But I think many times as Christians, we're not understanding how, yes, we should love the person we want to marry. Of course, they need to be the primary individual in our life. They shouldn't be the only individual in our life by a long shot. And also, we need to be recognizing for how they are crowding out our relationship with God. What are you're a single guy? I mean, what are your thoughts though about that?
I think you hit something really important. I think one of the things is like the other half kind of like feeling like I'm not complete until I have a wife, or like I'm not complete until I have a girlfriend. Like I don't know. I don't think that's true. I think God made us whole beings, and we experience brokenness in our life, but that doesn't mean that we are incapable of being who God wants us to be in the state we're in this case, singleness for me. And so just being as a single man, I've felt so inadequate in comparison to other married men because, I don't have that kind of status as like, I feel like I give a lot of power to married people because it's like, oh my gosh, which I love married people, but it's not the point. It's just more of like, I think I maybe a little envious in some ways of like, they have things better. It's like, they've got troubles just like anybody.
Yeah, marriage doesn't solve all your problems. Marriage can actually create additional problems, actually. And so I oftentimes say to people, it's so much better to be single wishing you were married than married wishing you were single.
That would be rough.
That's a miserable, yes. And I think a lot of times we find ourselves there. And again, the divorce rate in the church kind of exemplifies that. But I love what you're talking about with regard to singleness, though, is that in whatever stage we're in, the ability to be content in that stage. And contentment doesn't mean that we don't have a desire for something else, but to be at peace and to be at rest in the midst of that, trusting that God has the next thing for us, trusting that God has a wife for us if that's part of his plan, has a husband for a woman if that's part of his plan, but really being able to enter into that rest and choosing obedience. And you talked about joy earlier, being able to be in joy, living out the fruit of the Spirit, even in our singleness. I just think that there's such a tepid, generally speaking, I don't think the church even deals with singleness all that well. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think you're totally right. I think a lot of things are geared towards like people preparing for marriage or like couples. It doesn't mean they're totally leaving out singles. I feel like a lot of times it's like third wheeling or like a tag along. Now I will say the exception is the church I'm in. We are doing something for singles.
That's great,
and I'm sure other ministries are doing.
Well,
that
I know
too.
Other churches that are doing some stuff for singles. And yet I've been to some singles groups and I'm like, Lord Jesus, get me out of here. I mean, this is horrendous in the church. And so, but I know that there are some churches, sounds like yours is one of them, that, and I think, I've been in a number of churches. I love our church, But when it comes to singleness in general, I feel like we're missing part of the beauty and the joy of cross-generational ministry, of cross-generational relationship, of marrieds and singles coming together, as opposed to this, oh, I only want to be around people that are like me. Singles, frankly, are, and I was, obviously, we've all been single, but I think singles can sometimes feel like, oh, I don't want to be around those, around married people. I may value what they're doing. I may want what they have, but in my stage, I just kind of want to be around other singles, and sometimes married people feel the opposite as well. Like, I just want to be around others that kind of get my stage of life and get what it's like to have young kids or whatever. But we really need to be around one another across the nuclear family and across in singleness and cross-generationally. We need to be together in ways that actually strengthen one another and bless one another in various stages of life. And I think too often we're kind of honing in again just on the kind of mold that I'm particularly in, and I don't think that's generally healthy.
That's a good point. I think something else you added on earlier, especially just growing in the different fruits of the Spirit, and like I think just growing in our character, I feel like that would just help in so many areas. Like regardless of you're single or you're married, like if we can grow in like these gifts or like in these different fruits, I feel like we'd see a lot of change in our church. Like I feel like there'd be less hurt, or maybe less people feeling left out or something. And but at the same time, I think on the flip side, there has been good things too. So I can't discredit that either. But yeah. So
what you mentioned something earlier also about just something that made me think about the kind of side A, side B perspective that we hear about often. And for those who don't know that are listening or watching this, what I'm talking about is there's the side A, which is side A in terms of gay identified individuals that believe that God created them in the LGBT kind of world and spectrum, and whatever their kind of feeling is their identity, they can hyphenate that to their Christianity. They can live that out fully. Two guys can be together sexually, all that kind of stuff. Two women, two whatever, and there's no problem with that. They think God blesses that, and that's kind of side A. Side B would be, no, we understand that that God created sex for the container of marriage for one man and one woman, the covenant of marriage, and we're not going to engage sexually with the same sex, even though we are attracted to the same sex, or we identify as queer or transgender or whatever. But we are going to take what we feel and make that part of our identity and hyphenate that to our Christianity, and we're going to live out of that identity. And I often talk about this. You've been following our podcast, so you've heard me talk about this. To me, that is such a fault line of. It is absolutely, yes, it's absolutely an oxymoron that I'm going to be devoted to Jesus, but I'm going to own an identity that if I acted out would be sin, and somehow that's supposed to be a healthy place for me to be. Rather, like we're always saying, we need to be more honest about what we struggle with. We need to be far more open and vulnerable about, I experience same-sex attraction, I experience a struggle with heterosexual porn or whatever, and I need help and support in this. And I heard you saying earlier about even the desire to one day be married, not knowing how that would ever happen, not knowing, but just your openness to that. One thing about both of those, side A and side B, is they really close the door on marriage. They've, in most cases, I think there are some exceptions, but they've really closed the door on marriage and have decided, because of the way they feel, this is who they are, this is their identity, God's not going to change us one iota, and it's such a hopeless place to be in. And so what I'm hearing you say is, I struggle with these feelings of same-sex attraction. God has grown me a lot in this and met me in powerful ways. And one day, I'm very, very open to being married at some point, would like to have a family, but I don't know what that looks like from here to get there. But I hear an openness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm open. I'm just like, God, you got to change me if that's the case. And I guess God can do anything. If it's his will, great. I think I'm just still in that stage where it's hard to see how that's going to happen. It doesn't mean I don't have crushes on girls every now and then, but it's really hard for me to see, like, can I be a boyfriend, or is that like, what does that look like? And And another thing I want to say is like, even if, let's just take SSA out of the equation, even just if I didn't have that, I feel like there's a lot of still similar principles that would need to be applied as far as just upholding boundaries and like knowing your self-worth, walking in the fruits of the Spirit, like not idolizing your other person or something. And like, and so I think God is just working my heart right now. And I think when it's time, it's time. And I like to say I'm a beautiful mess.
Yes. Well, and hopefully I didn't feel like a beautiful mess at one time. I just felt like a mess. But I think that's many times we find ourselves there, and God sees us with that as well. Like he wants to move in our lives and draw us closer to him, and he's not afraid of rolling up his sleeves. And I realize God doesn't have sleeves, but I mean, the metaphor, rolling up his sleeves and getting into our mess with us and really drawing us and helping us through that. One thing that I just want to also clarify and make sure that is abundantly obvious to everybody, viewing this or listening to this, is we are not in any way ones who are like, oh, God definitely has marriage for you, or all you need is a good woman to help you overcome same-sex attraction, or as a girl, all you need, or a woman, all you need is a good guy to help you over. No, that is not what somebody needs right now. What they need is deeper healing. What they need is for God to pour in. What they need is the body of Christ to be really open and vulnerable along with them, to walk with them, for God. I was sharing with you earlier over lunch that I felt like God really used that men's group that I've talked so much about on this podcast to refather me and to really, and they didn't know what they were doing, but I think maybe a better way of saying it, rather than saying refather, because my dad was still alive at that point, we had a very good relationship at that point, but somehow these guys activated this core, this acorn, this seed of masculinity within me that had never been activated before. And they began to pour into me. God began to pour through them into my life to start to put meat on the bones of this masculine frame and structure that I just felt like I was a skeleton in. I had no real shape or value or strength in any of these things. And so I think that's critical for us when we're considering, well, what does marriage possibly look like? I don't know, at all, Michael, whether God has marriage for you or not. But here's what I do know, is that I believe God wants us to be open. I believe that God doesn't want to put a false ceiling on the level of transformation he wants to do in our lives. And so I never go around promising anybody that God has this or that for you, but I do know that we're all called to take up our crosses, to deny ourselves and follow after Jesus. That is the normal Christian life that we're all called to. My cross looked similar in many ways. Our crosses are different, but we have similar stories. But those, no matter who is listening to or watching this, they are also called to take up their cross and follow after Jesus. And we don't want to hold out some false promise of, oh, all these desires are going to go away. I still experience some same-sex attraction. It doesn't rule my life the way it did. But the truth is that it is about our whole gamut of life. Our whole purpose is about that. Denying ourselves, choosing Jesus, following after him, picking up that cross and going, and being willing for God to do anything. Like, God, I can't imagine it. I can't even see how this is going to happen, but I'm open to you doing that. And the sad thing to me about side A and side B is most of them have closed themselves off to even the possibility of it. They even resist, in many respects, looking at history, looking at trauma, looking at things that could have fed into some of the development of issues in their life. And so when we settle into an identity and we choose to embrace that and hold on to that, many times pretty vehemently, it's no wonder. I mean, God's not going to take a pry bar and take that away from us. He's waiting for us to give this sense of identity, this broken sense of identity to him. I mean, what are your kind of thoughts around that?
Wow, no, that's very deep. I think I'm still working on that myself. And I think at one point I thought I was in that category. I think I thought that just God couldn't work in this area. Like, this is off limits, or this was like Pandora's box that couldn't be closed or something something. And I think, unfortunately, there are some Christians who might think that too.
Well, some Christian leaders, unfortunately, teach that kind of stuff too.
Yeah. But I mean, God is so much bigger. His grace is so much better. And I think that's the best answer I can give, honestly.
Oh, I think it's a great answer. The whole point is not that we think that we know what God's going to do next. I mean, if we understood God, he wouldn't be God, right? We need to understand that he's transcendent and we are not him. But that willingness, that humility to leave ourselves open and believe that God, I want to obey you. I want to follow you. So often I wanted God to show me the end from the beginning and show me exactly what, tell me the end results of being obedient and following after you. But he doesn't do that, right? He's just saying, Gary, I just want you to be obedient in the next step. I'm going to give you enough light to take that next step. And sometimes it's a little dark taking that next step, but I know that I'm calling you to do this. And when I'm willing to do that, when I'm willing to take that step and then take another and just keep following him in that way, I mean, I it's so hard for me to even express how and I've said it multiple times, but I feel like I fall short of expressing it every time, is that back where I was back in the day when I thought I'm going to grow old and be alone for the rest of my life if I leave the LGBT world. There's no way I'm ever going to be married to a woman. There's no way I'm ever going to have a family. Where am I going to find satisfaction in life, basically? I mean, I could pour myself into career, I could pour myself into ministry, and those are kind of things that I was thinking would actually happen. But the enemy's lie that you are going to grow old and be alone for the rest of your life, you're never going to have a family, you're never going to have real meaning, that lie kept me in the LGBT world longer than I wanted to stay, honestly, because I thought it was true. Of course it was true. All the evidence around me says that that's true. And yet, looking at the results of what God's done in my life and in so many of my friends' lives, where they are married, where they do have children, and not one of them does, but there are so many that do. I just want to encourage people, look, don't put a ceiling on what God can do in your life. Don't predetermine what you're going to allow him to do or what you're going to allow him to touch in your life because you believe it's identity or for any reason. Have an open hand. And if you don't have open hands, you don't have an open heart, pray about that. Ask him to help you to fully embrace, God, I am completely open and I choose to trust you with whatever my future looks like. The truth is we don't have control over our future anyway. And so why not fully surrender that? I mean, how good has it gone every time we've tried to do it ourselves?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I feel like it just grows our dependence on God. I think that is just the daily thing, trying to learn better. And I think about that verse that talks about my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness. And Paul's like, please, Lord, take out this thorn. Like, I don't want this anymore. And he's like pleading. I feel like that thorn for me was same-sex attraction, where I just wanted God to change me. And but in a way, he was changing my heart, if anything, my heart posture, and just to really depend on him. I think he really just wanted me to talk to him, to be open to him, to let him be my father, and to cry to him. And like, I can't tell you the amount of nights I've just cried, just in almost like a type of grief, in a way of like wishing I had something different or a loss of something. And but I think God's way is different than mine, and so he's shown me something different through that.
Well, you and I were talking earlier, and you mentioned that thorn in the flesh concept, and you were talking about how you do see this as a thorn in the flesh, and so did I. It's changed dramatically now to where it doesn't really feel like that anymore. It doesn't control my life the way it used to by a long shot. But when you were talking about it, you said, yeah, I see it as a thorn in the flesh, but the thorn isn't me. The thorn isn't my identity. Like, this is the thing that I deal with, but it's not something I am. And I thought that was such a powerful distinction that you were making.
That's a good point. I forgot to mention that. Thank you for bringing that.
Yeah, no, it's good.
Because it's like it might be attached to me, but it's not of me. It's not something I want to claim like it's my identity. And I think we live in a culture where it's like, you feel it, that's what you are, whatever. It's like, take that however you want. And I think we, just as a culture, have to learn to kind of go beyond our feelings in some ways. Not that they're wrong. Some feelings we have to listen to, like God-given feelings, like in our sadness or grief or whatever that is. But
pay attention to feelings, but they shouldn't be in the driver's seat necessarily, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Leading it with truth.
Yes.
And sometimes we need others to help us with that truth. Like sometimes it's hard for me to discern the truth on my own. So having like a band of dangerous brothers is something that I really need. And I've been able to find that in some ways, but like you mentioned, just being open, having an open hand, letting others in my life, that is so hard because it's sometimes a trust issue of like, who will let me down or like, what's going to happen? But in a way, I can't live in fear either, because I think God's got like, he's got plans I don't even know. Like I've been so surprised the friends that I have let in, like just really helped me and through this journey. And I don't think I would have seen that. I have a really good college friend I befriended, and we're still friends to this day. And he knows my story, and he's been able to kind of coach me through this, even though he doesn't actually experience it. But he just has a loving heart, and I feel like more compelled to have that too. I honestly, I don't want this to be the main story of my life. Like, I think there's so much more. The struggles or the problems, it's like that's just one small thing in his story that he has for me, like my life, and I can only imagine. I think he's got great things for me.
Yeah, well, I do too, and for those listening and viewing this, so many. I remember getting to such places of utter hopelessness and just thinking, there was no hope. The enemy was just speaking all kinds of lies, and yet it felt like, of course, this is true. There is no hope for you. Your life has no real value or purpose, and which is part of what just feeds into utter hopelessness and even just fantasy about death and those kinds of things. And the enemy is really moving us in that direction. He comes to steal, kill, and destroy, right? That's what he does. But Jesus came to give us life and give it more abundant. And so it's as we obey him, as we follow him. But you mentioned just a moment ago, as we wrap up here, you mentioned, I talk about band of brothers all the time, but I think you said band of dangerous brothers.
Yeah.
Okay, so tell me, I like that addition, band of dangerous brothers.
I'm coining that from an old mentor of mine.
Yes. Okay.
And, yeah, that was like our
I might have to modify
name.
my statement on bands of brothers to bands of dangerous brothers.
Because it feels dangerous. Yeah. It's kind of like we're in uncharted waters. Like we're kind of dealing with different things, not always sexual things. Sometimes it's just emotional, spiritual, whatever that is. But we're kind of, I think it doesn't feel safe because it's sometimes uncomfortable. And that's why I think the dangerous part is like, yeah, there's some risk here. But I think with a safe community, like I say in quotes safe, just kind of like a godly community, and imperfect people in the body of Christ, it's like God can still use them. And it's kind of the church in a way. Like church is full of imperfect people that God can still use. We don't want to be known for just the hurt, obviously. Like we don't want to, I hate church hurt. Like I wish I pray for healing for, in a way, I experience a lot of church hurt that I've had to forgive and move on. But
and I've also been a part of hurting other people, as well, when if I get honest. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. So I lost my train of thought.
Oh, sorry, I interrupted you. Sorry about that, Michael. But anyway, I'm really glad that you came on and just did this podcast with us and shared some of your story with us. And we're just as vulnerable and open with us as you've been.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thanks, Gary.
For sure. Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Love and Truth podcast. We're glad that you were here. Glad that you had a chance to hear from Michael. And I hope that this has been encouraging to you and also challenging in your own walk as well. We'll look forward to seeing you in another episode. Take care.
Hey, thanks so much for joining us for the Love and Truth Network podcast. We hope that the stories and insights shared have ignited in you a sense of God's powerful love for you and given you encouragement for your own journey toward relational and sexual wholeness. Remember, transformation is absolutely possible when rooted in grace, truth, and authentic biblical community. Subscribe today, share with a friend, share with your pastor, and we look forward to seeing you in our next Love and Truth Network podcast.